especially when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of sheer precision.
Right, yeah, like engineering.
Exactly. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that, that jagged white line right across the bone.
And the doctor just points at it and says, there it is.
Yeah, it's binary. I mean, it's broken or it's not. It's clean. And frankly, it's deeply comforting.
Oh, for sure. We as humans inherently like things to be visible.
Right, to be categorized, to be solvable with a simple mechanical fix.
But then you step into something like the world of neurodevelopment or complex trauma, and suddenly that pristine x-ray machine is just useless.
Oh, completely useless.
You are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah, where feelings, interpretations, and endless intersecting variables just sort of take over.
Exactly.
And that exact transition, like from the clean, binary, unbroken logic of a literal machine to the murky, highly emotional landscape of human feelings, that is exactly the territory we are mapping out today.
It's a huge shift.
It really is. So we are taking an extensive, unflinching look at a highly controversial new manifesto. It's an ebook titled Exploring the Pentium Era, From Socket 4 to Web 2.0 by Conrad Riker.
Yeah, and this one is quite a ride.
It is. And we need to explicitly note right up front that this book is heavily aimed at a very specific demographic.
Right, the manosphere.
Exactly, the manosphere, men going their own way, which is MGTOW, and men's rights activists. The premise of this book is going to completely challenge how you view every piece of technology you touch today.
It really reframes everything.
Yeah, and it basically argues that the shift from binary logic to what he calls emotional consensus is actively destroying the digital world.
And before we get a single sentence further into the text itself, we really need to set some extremely clear ground rules for this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. Essential.
Because the book we are analyzing today contains highly politically charged, polarizing content.
Very polar.
Right. It dives aggressively into topics regarding gender, modern feminism, and corporate diversity initiatives. So I want to make it absolutely 100% clear to you, the listener, that we are not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints presented in this book, nor are we here to condemn them or act as some kind of moral filter for you.
Right, we're just looking at the text.
Exactly. Our goal today is purely journalistic and analytical. We are here to impartially report on the contents of the ebook and help you understand the exact arguments, the historical claims, and the underlying logic the author is using.
Yeah, we are here to read the blueprint, not to endorse the building.
Perfectly said.
And if you are intrigued and want to read those blueprints for yourself, I highly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book so you can read the full source material.
Yeah, it's definitely something you have to read to fully grasp the scale of his argument.
For sure. And make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. Also, if you enjoy these thorough breakdowns, please remember to like and subscribe.
It's how we keep bringing these deep dives to you.
Exactly. So, with the housekeeping out of the way, let's just get into it.
Let's do it.
The core mission of this deep dive is to unpack this central, deeply provocative thesis. The author argues that our technological institutions were highly functional, incredibly efficient, and robust back when they were built by men who were focused solely on raw performance.
Right, like pure optimization.
Yeah, but, the argument goes, those same institutions have since been captured and bogged down by Marxist, feminist, and HR-driven ideologies.
The foundation of this entire worldview starts by drawing a really stark contrast between what is described in the text as the golden age of silicon, meaning the hardware-focused ethos of the 1990s.
Right.
And what he views as the overly sensitive, bloated software environment of today. And the text uses advertising to make this point right out of the gate.
Which is actually a very clever sociological lens, honestly.
It really is. The text points to a specific 1994 Intel ad campaign.
Oh yeah, reading the description of this in the book, it almost feels like a dispatch from a totally different universe.
It really does. So in it, you have a man in a lab coat physically soldering a motherboard.
Like actual sparks flying.
Yeah, the visuals are all sparks, metal, intense focus. And the tagline on the screen reads, "For the hands that build, not coddle."
Not coddle. I mean, that is a very loaded word to use in a tech commercial.
Finely loaded.
Yeah.
But according to the data cited in the book, that specific ad resonated so deeply with the consumer base that it boosted Intel sales by 37% that exact quarter.
Wow, 37% just from one ad campaign.
Yeah, and then the author immediately juxtaposes that raw sparks and metal imagery with a 2023 Apple campaign for what they called an inclusion chip.
Okay, and what exactly was that campaign? Because it sounds vastly different.
The book describes it as featuring a gender-fluid avatar, animated in soft pastels, literally knitting a scarf out of glowing ones and zeros.
Oh, wow. So from soldering to knitting.
Exactly. And the text asserts that this Apple campaign was a financial disaster, causing their stock to take a significant hit during the campaign's run.
So what's the broader argument he's making with those two ads?
The argument is that the core consumer base for high-end technology, the people who actually push the boundaries of computing,
Yeah.
they do not want virtue signaling.
Right, they don't care about the messaging.
Yeah, they don't want to be told they are inclusive. They want voltage readings. They want raw, unadulterated power and performance.
And the book backs this up with some absolutely wild retail data from the era. There is a citation of a 1997 CompUSA sales report that shows a massive, undeniable gender divide in how hardware was being purchased.
That data point was fascinating.
It was. According to the book, women bought 83% of all inkjet printers sold that year.
83%.
Yeah, and the market research showed they were using them mostly for things like family photos, newsletters, community organizing.
So highly social connective tasks.
Exactly. Meanwhile, men purchased 91% of standalone CPUs.
And it's the reason for those CPU purchases that the author zeroes in on.
Right, because they weren't buying them for newsletters.
No, the market research cited shows that the primary reasons men gave for buying these expensive high-end processors were almost entirely competitive.
Like gaming.
Well, yes, but specifically he cites benchmarking, which is literally just running a program to see how high of a score your computer can get compared to a stranger on the internet.
So just pure status.
Yeah, benchmarking and, quote, making the neighbors jealous.
That's hilarious. So the thesis here is that tech wasn't gendered by accident or by some oppressive top-down patriarchy forcing men to like motherboards and women to like printers.
Right, he's arguing it was completely organic.
Yeah, the argument is that it was gendered by organic market demand and biological interest. Men were drawn to the solitary optimization of the machine, while women were drawn to the social utility of the output.
That's the exact premise. And what is structurally really fascinating about this book is how it connects that specific, hyper-competitive, hardware-focused mindset to the actual tangible efficiency of the code being written during that decade.
Which brings us to John Carmack.
Yes, the legend.
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know, John Carmack is the programmer behind the 1993 cultural phenomenon that was the video game Doom.
Doom basically changed everything.
It did. And Carmack is held up in this text as the ultimate archetype of the 90s coder.
He's like the patron saint of this book.
Totally. The book notes that Carmack treated computer memory, RAM, like a precious, incredibly scarce resource. Because back then, it literally was.
Yeah, you measured RAM in kilobytes and megabytes, not gigabytes.
Exactly. So you couldn't just throw sloppy code at a machine and expect it to run. Carmack had to write ultra-efficient, highly optimized code that squeezed every single conceivable ounce of performance out of severely limited hardware.
Right, like he was famous for these crazy mathematical workarounds.
Yeah, like the fast inverse square root, which is still studied in computer science classes today. He treated the machine with a strict, disciplined respect.
And then the text just takes that Carmack discipline and crashes it head-on into modern software development.
Specifically citing the TikTok Android application.
Yes, this part is wild. This is where the author points out that the TikTok app can use up to 8 gigabytes of RAM just to buffer 15-second videos of people dancing.
Which, purely from a computer science perspective, is a staggering amount of memory for such a simple task.
I mean, think about your smartphone right now. The text makes this mind-bending comparison. The phone in your pocket has exponentially more processing power than the entire guidance system of the spacecraft we shot to Mars.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
It is. Yet, if you've ever sat in a restaurant trying to scan a QR code, you know your phone will sometimes freeze and choke just trying to load a 2-page PDF menu.
Right, because the software is so heavy.
Yeah, the author argues this happens because modern developers treat RAM like, and this is a direct quote from the book, a therapist's couch, cushioning every byte with safe space buffers.
Wow. That phrase perfectly encapsulates what he calls the diversity tax, which is a major pillar of the book's economic argument.
Okay, unpack the diversity tax for us.
So the author cites a Forbes analysis claiming that for every single hour a corporate tech team spends on DEI compliance, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, it effectively costs them 3 hours of actual structural development work.
3 hours lost for every 1 hour spent on compliance.
Yeah.
If you scale that across the entirety of Silicon Valley, across millions of developers, you are talking about an astronomical drain on global technological productivity.
That is the exact mathematical leap the author makes. And to ground this in the software itself, the book points to the sheer size of operating systems.
Like Windows.
Right. Windows 3.1, released in the early 90s, consisted of roughly 3 million lines of code. It ran entire businesses, it was fast, it was stable.
And Windows 11.
Windows 11, today, consists of over 50 million lines of code.
50 million. It's like we've traded a stripped-down manual transmission muscle car for a massive luxury sedan.
That's a great analogy.
Like, sure, the sedan has lane assist warnings, internal diagnostics, and 14 airbags, but it is weighed down by so much automated safety bloat that it can barely accelerate when you press the gas pedal.
Exactly.
But here is where I really need you to help clarify the mechanics of this text for me.
Sure, what's sticking out to you?
Well, it's one thing to say Windows 11 is huge. It's another to blame that size on human resources.
Right, the connection isn't immediately obvious.
Exactly. How exactly does the author connect the sheer size of the code base, those extra 47 million lines of code, directly to corporate HR policies? What is the actual structural mechanism happening inside the software?
It's a great question, because it sounds like a massive leap until you look at the mechanism the author calls defensive programming.
Defensive programming.
Yeah. According to the text, this bloat is directly driven by a pervasive, industry-wide fear of social and internal backlash. The author cites a 2023 dev survey where 72% of corporate programmers admitted to adding what the book calls woke features.
What counts as a woke feature in code?
Well, things like highly complex inclusivity dashboards, granular language filters, or really exhaustive edge case profile settings. And the survey claims they do this solely to dodge potential Twitter mobs or preemptive HR complaints.
So they're writing code not because the user needs it to function, but as a shield against criticism?
Precisely. The argument is that modern code is bloated because it is fundamentally forced to accommodate countless, highly specific edge cases of modern identity and language, rather than just executing a binary task.
So it's constantly checking itself to make sure it's not offending anyone.
Yeah, and to illustrate how catastrophic this can be, the book mentions a specific tech startup that decided standard error logs, like the text files a computer generates when it crashes, were too aggressive.
Right, because an error log usually just says something scary, like fatal exception or process killed.
Exactly, it's very blunt. So this startup replaced those standard efficient error alerts with dynamic links to therapy hotlines and long empathetic paragraphs apologizing for the software failure.
You're kidding!
No, and the result. During a high-traffic event, the servers encountered a minor bug.
Okay, a normal hiccup.
Right. But instead of just logging a one-line error and moving on, the servers completely melted down because the system exhausted all its processing power trying to dynamically generate and format thousands of empathetic apology messages.
That is wild. They literally broke the machine by trying to make it polite.
That is the author's core thesis on modern software right there. He views this woke code as a digital participation trophy.
Like, it's nice to look at, but it doesn't do anything real.
Right. It functions totally fine when the weather is fair and traffic is low, but it completely, spectacularly fails under the intense pressure of real-world stress.
And that concept, systems failing under stress, is the perfect bridge into the next phase of this manifesto.
Because the author loves talking about crisis.
He does. Because if the author believes modern software is too bloated to survive a crisis, he points to history to show exactly what kind of culture can survive one.
Oh, absolutely.
The book builds on this idea of raw 90s efficiency to argue that a very specific, unapologetic, results-driven masculinity was literally the only thing capable of building and saving the digital world during genuine historical crises.
To lay the groundwork for this, the text goes all the way back to the foundation of the internet itself, the ARPANET.
Right, the very beginning.
Yeah, the author spends a significant amount of time detailing how Vid Cerf drafted the TCP/IP protocol. Now, for context, TCP/IP is the fundamental communication language of the internet.
It's the rules of the road.
Exactly. If you think of the internet as a massive global postal service, TCP/IP is the set of rules that dictates exactly how the envelopes are addressed, how they are routed through various post offices, and how they are reassembled when they arrive. It's the bedrock of modern civilization.
And according to the historical account in the book, Cerf didn't design this in a boardroom with a committee.
No, not at all. The book details how Cerf mapped out this civilization-altering architecture on a cocktail napkin during a poker game in 1973.
On a napkin, at a poker game.
Yeah, it was just guys drinking, playing cards, and solving one of the most complex engineering problems in human history on a scrap of paper.
The book also brings up Ray Tomlinson in this same era, the man who invented email in 1971.
Right, another huge milestone.
And the detail the author loves here is that Tomlinson invented email simply by repurposing the @ symbol on his keyboard because it was rarely used.
Just a quick practical choice.
Exactly. There were no focus groups to see how people felt about the @ symbol. There were no sensitivity readers. There were no stakeholder alignment surveys.
He just did it.
Yeah, it was just a lone engineer executing a highly efficient unilateral decision.
The author uses these early, agile moments of creation to set up a brutal contrast with the modern deployment of 5G networks.
Oh, the 5G stuff is fascinating.
It is. And to highlight this paralysis, the text drops an incredible, highly specific anecdote about a leaked AT&T Slack thread from 2019.
This part of the book is staggering if it's entirely accurate. Walk us through what happened in this Slack thread.
So according to the text, a massive internal Slack thread leaked, showing 87 different engineers and middle managers at AT&T spending 3 solid months debating telecom terminology.
Wait, 3 months just on Slack?
3 full months. Specifically, they were debating whether they should rename the foundational network architecture term master cell tower to a more inclusive term like primary cell tower.
And to be clear, we aren't just talking about changing a label on a PowerPoint presentation here.
John, no.
In telecom, the master tower is the specific piece of hardware that dictates the timing and synchronization for all the smaller slave nodes around it.
Exactly. It's deeply embedded in the legacy code as the physical architecture. But the author's point isn't even about the technical difficulty of the change.
What's the main issue then?
It's about the sheer waste of cognitive bandwidth. The book claims that this internal semantic debate, which spawned committees, HR reviews, and endless meetings, delayed AT&T's actual physical 5G deployment timeline by 6 entire quarters.
18 months.
Yep.
18 months of delayed technological progress, so 87 people could argue about the emotional resonance of a network diagram.
The author uses this as his prime, undeniable example of how semantic theater and performative corporate guilt have completely paralyzed our ability to build things.
That's a pretty damning example.
And he doesn't just keep this critique domestic either. He brings in international data to show how this ideological bloat is a distinct disadvantage on the global stage.
Right, the 5G rollout comparison between South Korea and Germany.
Yeah. According to the data cited in the text, South Korea utilized an engineering core that was entirely male, operating under a strict, hyper-efficient military-style deployment model.
Just pure speed and execution.
Exactly. And they managed to blanket their mountainous country with functional 5G infrastructure in just 18 months.
And Germany.
Well, the book contrasts this with Germany, which the author claims explicitly mandated gender-balanced teams and strict diversity audits throughout their infrastructure rollout.
Okay, so a totally different approach.
And the result, according to the text, was a deployment that took 5 full years and still failed to provide consistent service across major urban centers.
5 years versus 18 months.
Yeah. And to hammer the point home, the author cites an EU tech audit claiming that for every hour the German team spent on actual radio waveform optimization, 2 hours were wasted on mandatory unconscious bias training modules.
So the thesis is clear. Bureaucracy and inclusion initiatives act as this friction that grinds progress to an absolute halt.
That's his main argument, yes.
But the absolute centerpiece of this argument regarding crisis and efficiency is the chapter on Y2K.
Oh, this chapter is intense.
It really is. For anyone too young to remember, as the year 1999 was coming to an end, there was a legitimate global panic.
A huge panic.
Because early computer programmers, to save that precious, scarce memory we talked about earlier, often formatted dates using only the last 2 digits of the year. So 1998 was just 98.
Which meant that when the clock struck midnight on January 1st, 2000, millions of critical computer systems like banking, power grids, aviation, they were going to read the year as every 00 and assume it was 1900.
potentially causing a cascading failure of modern infrastructure.
It was a very real, very terrifying deadline.
And the author paints this incredibly vivid, almost cinematic picture of the IBM war room as the clock was ticking down in late 1999.
He really sets the scene.
He describes 47 men in wrinkled, sweat-stained Oxford shirts, surrounded by empty coffee cups, frantically rewriting 2 million lines of mission-critical code.
Just absolute chaos and focus.
Exactly. There were no yoga breaks, there were no inclusion circles, there was just the ticking clock and the raw code.
And out of this war room, the author pulls a specific anecdote that really anchors the emotional weight of his argument.
The story of Dave.
Yes, it's the story of a COBOL coder named Dave. Now, COBOL is an ancient programming language mostly used in legacy financial systems. It is notoriously difficult, rigid, and unforgiving.
Not a fun language to work with.
Not at all. According to the text, Dave was working such insane, ungodly hours during the final months of the Y2K panic that his wife actually packed up and left him.
A total collapse of his personal life under the weight of the work.
Total collapse. And Dave's reaction, as the author tells it, is the crux of the entire book.
What did he do?
Dave didn't take time off. He didn't ask for a mental health day. Dave literally took his wedding ring, taped it to the side of an IBM server rack, drank a massive stack of Jolt Cola, and proceeded to manually fix 18,000 lines of COBOL code in a single 72-hour coding marathon.
He taped his ring to the server. I mean, that is a staggering image.
It really is. The author holds Dave up as the ultimate, unvarnished archetype of the era.
It's a guy who just gets it done no matter the cost.
Right. Dave is the man who sacrificed his own emotional well-being, his marriage, his personal life, because the machine, and by extension, the survival of the global economic infrastructure, demanded it.
And the author argues that without men like Dave, who are willing to destroy themselves to optimize a system, the modern world ceases to function.
That's exactly it.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on the premise purely by looking at the text itself.
Sure, let's hear it.
So the author attributes the slow 5G rollout at AT&T entirely to HR semantics, and he attributes the success of early tech purely to this raw, unfettered masculinity.
Yikes.
But isn't he inadvertently highlighting a massive shift in corporate scale that has nothing to do with gender or ideology?
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. A poker game in 1973 where a guy draws on a napkin is a localized, low-stakes environment. But AT&T in 2019 is a publicly traded, multinational telecom giant navigating federal regulations, thousands of employees, and billions of dollars in hardware.
Right, it's a completely different beast.
So how does the author address the sheer, inevitable reality of modern bureaucracy? I mean, you can't run AT&T like a garage startup, regardless of who is working there.
That is a phenomenal critique, and it raises a crucial question about the logistics of scale.
Yeah, because scale changes everything.
It does. But the author's answer to this lies in evolutionary psychology. He actually doesn't deny that scale creates complexity, but he argues that our response to that scale is what's fundamentally broken.
Interesting. How so?
The book asserts that evolution biologically wired the male brain for systemizing over empathizing.
Meaning a preference for building logical structures rather than navigating human emotions.
Correct. The author's argument is that when a crisis reaches a massive scale, like when civilization truly hangs by a thread, such as during the impending threat of Y2K, society instinctively, on a primal level, abandons all of its inclusive bureaucratic rhetoric.
So the bureaucracy just falls away when things get real.
Yeah. When the power grid is about to fail, nobody cares about the terminology of a master cell tower. Society falls back on its deepest survival mechanism, which is relying on obsessed, sleep-deprived men who communicate in hexadecimal code and prioritize raw, binary results over human feelings.
Wow. Okay.
So, to answer your question, the author views modern bureaucracy not as a necessary outcome of corporate scale, but as a decadent luxury of peacetime.
A luxury of peacetime. That's an interesting way to put it.
He argues it is an artificial bloat that actively sabotages our ability to handle real crises when they inevitably occur.
So in his worldview, the moment things get truly dangerous, the HR department evaporates, the committees dissolve, and the guys with the soldering irons and the Jolt Cola have to step in to save the day.
That's exactly how he frames it.
Which perfectly bridges us into the next major section of this deep dive.
The open source stuff?
Yes. Because if corporate telecommunications and massive companies like Apple have been completely swallowed by this peacetime bureaucracy, the author sees the open source software community as the absolute last remaining digital battlefield.
He portrays open source not just as a collaborative space, but as an active, brutal war zone between technical competence and ideological coddling.
So for listeners who might not be deep into software development, what exactly is open source software?
Open source software is essentially code that is publicly accessible. Anyone, anywhere in the world can view it, modify it, and submit contributions to improve it.
It's like a massive public library of code.
Exactly. It is really the crucible for the author's entire theory, because it is supposed to be a pure meritocracy. And the central looming figure in his argument here is Linus Torvalds.
Ah, the creator of the Linux kernel.
Yes. Now, to understand the stakes here, you have to understand what a kernel is.
Give us the breakdown.
The kernel is the absolute core of an operating system. It is the fundamental translator that sits between the physical hardware like the CPU, the memory, and the software applications you run.
It's the bridge.
Right. If the kernel fails, the machine dies.
Mm-hmm.
And Linux is arguably the most important piece of software on the planet.
It runs everything, right?
Pretty much. The text notes that the Linux kernel is maintained by a global contributor base that is 76% male, and it effectively runs 90% of the world's cloud servers. The entire modern internet, your banking apps, your streaming services, all rest on the foundation of Linux.
And Linus Torvalds, the guy who invented it and still manages it, is famous for being, well, let's say aggressively blunt.
That's a nice way of putting it. He does not suffer fools.
Not at all. The book quotes a legendary 2001 rant from Torvalds on a public developer mailing list where he flat out stated, "I don't care about your feelings, I care about the code."
Exactly. And the author absolutely champions this attitude.
Mm-hmm.
He views Torvalds' abrasive nature not as a character flaw, but as a necessary Darwinian filter.
Like a protective mechanism.
Yeah, it's a firewall that keeps weak, inefficient code out of the world's most important infrastructure. The text highlights a highly specific incident from 2016 to prove this point.
What happened in 2016?
A developer submitted a patch, which is basically an update, to the Linux kernel that was designed to add trigger warnings to certain error logs that contained aggressive or fatal language.
Adding trigger warnings to the core translator of global web servers.
Right. Just think about that.
And according to the book, Torvalds reviewed this patch and manually reverted it in exactly 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
His attached comment simply read, "Debugging isn't group therapy."
The author argues that open source projects like Linux only survive because they ruthlessly filter for technical competence and efficiency rather than compassion or inclusivity.
But the author also points out that this meritocratic firewall is currently under massive attack.
Right, it's a war zone.
He spends a lot of time discussing the 2018 Debian Code of Conduct purge. What exactly is Debian, and what happened there?
Debian is one of the oldest, most respected, and most stable distributions of the Linux operating system. It's a massive community project.
Very prestigious.
Highly. According to the text, in 2018, the Debian leadership implemented a strict, legally binding code of conduct.
Okay.
This document explicitly prioritized inclusivity, emotional safety, and actively penalized any communication that was deemed toxic, abrasive, or unwelcoming to newcomers.
Essentially trying to outlaw the exact kind of blunt communication that Torvalds champions.
Precisely. And the book claims that the immediate result of enforcing this code of conduct was catastrophic for the project's brain trust.
What happened?
12 of Debian's most senior, highly skilled developers allegedly quit overnight. They refused to work under a system where they could be banned for aggressively critiquing bad code.
Wow, just walked away?
Yeah, and this ideological split spawned what the community calls forks.
A fork being when developers take the open source code, copy it, and start their own completely separate project with different rules.
Exactly. They take the code and go their own way. One of the most famous forks resulting from this era was Dev1.
Dev1, yeah.
Which explicitly rejected the new administrative overhead and the code of conduct, choosing to focus purely 100% on the underlying technology.
But it's not just community projects like Debian. The author goes after GitHub incredibly hard.
Oh, he really does.
GitHub is basically the global library and collaboration hub for almost all software development. And the book points to specific linguistic purges GitHub implemented in 2014 and 2021.
This is where the ideological clash becomes highly technical.
How so?
Well, GitHub deployed automated bots to scan millions of lines of code comments, documentation, and variable names for language that was deemed offensive or non-inclusive.
Bots just scrubbing the code.
Yeah, they flagged and demanded the removal of terms like dummy variable, brute force, and most notably, the standard database architecture terms master and slave.
Now, to a layperson, changing the words master and slave to primary and replica might seem like a simple, harmless find and replace operation.
Sure, it sounds easy enough.
But the author argues that policing this language literally guts productivity. Why? What is the actual technical nightmare of changing those words?
The technical nightmare is that these terms are deeply, inextricably embedded in decades of foundational architecture.
They aren't just labels on a screen for humans to read.
Exactly. They are variables that other machines use to communicate. If you force a change from master to main in a central repository, you instantly break millions of automated scripts, API endpoints, and dependency trees that are programmed to look for the word master.
You create a cascading failure across the internet.
Yes. The author argues that engineers are then forced to spend hundreds, sometimes thousands of hours manually hunting down broken connections and fixing legacy code instead of building new features.
He calls it technical debt for the mind.
Technical debt for the mind, exactly.
And he brings in some fascinating academic data to back up this claim of cognitive strain, citing a study out of UC Berkeley.
Yes, this study was a major point. According to the author's citation, this UC Berkeley study found that male developers experience a 17% higher cognitive load when they are forced to use gender-neutral or heavily sanitized error messages.
17% higher cognitive load. Why is that?
The argument is that parsing a grammatically complex, inclusive string like they see them expected before semicolon, instead of the standard rigid syntax, creates mental friction.
Because it's not binary anymore.
Exactly. And when you multiply that 17% increase in cognitive load over a 10-hour coding session, the resulting mental fatigue leads to drastically higher rates of structural errors in the code itself.
And he actually compares security vulnerability rates between projects to try and prove this mathematically.
He does.
He looks at the Apache HTTP server project and compares it to Node.js.
This is a very targeted comparison. Node.js is a massive, widely used runtime environment. The book claims that the leadership of Node.js spent years heavily focused on rewriting its documentation terminology.
Scrubbing out the terms.
Yeah, scrubbing out terms like master-slave and replacing them with leader-follower, prioritizing a welcoming environment.
And what was the measurable result of that focus, according to the author?
The author asserts that as a direct result of focusing cognitive bandwidth on semantics over rigorous engineering, Node.js suffered 14 times more critical CVEs than Apache.
Let's define that for the listener. What is a CVE?
A CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. It is essentially the standardized global dictionary of known, highly dangerous security flaws in software.
So a vulnerability hackers can exploit.
Exactly. If your software has a high number of critical CVEs, it means hackers can easily compromise it. The author argues that Apache, which maintained a traditional, less regulated, purely technical culture, remained highly secure.
While Node.js, bogged down by linguistic policing, became riddled with security holes.
Yes. Which brings us to the most provocative, biologically driven argument in this entire section.
Okay, let's get into it.
To explain why all of this is happening, the author brings up a 2007 Stanford lecture that was apparently titled, "Why Women Can't Write Firmware."
Wow. Obviously a massively inflammatory title designed to cause an uproar.
Absolutely designed for shock value.
But how does the author use this specific anecdote to claim that biological realities are being deliberately suppressed?
First, we need to understand what firmware is.
Right.
Firmware is the absolute lowest level of software. It is written directly into the non-volatile memory of the physical hardware. It controls the bare metal.
It's the foundation of the foundation.
Exactly. Writing firmware requires staring at hexadecimal code, just endless walls of numbers and letters, for 14 hours straight to find a single missing semicolon.
Sounds like torture.
It is. If you make one mistake in a web app, the page loads funny. If you make one mistake in firmware, you permanently brick the device. It becomes a useless piece of plastic.
So the stakes are incredibly high, and the tolerance for error is absolute zero.
It requires a level of obsessive, isolating focus that is almost hard to comprehend.
And how does that tie back to the Stanford lecture?
The author uses the Stanford anecdote as a prime example of institutions prioritizing emotional comfort over empirical debate.
Because the lecture was canceled.
Right. When that lecture was canceled due to the predictable outrage over the title, the author argues the university dodged a necessary scientific debate about biology.
He synthesizes various claims, right?
Yes, referencing studies on how testosterone affects risk tolerance and psychological trait differences regarding a preference for things versus people.
So his thesis is that the act of writing firmware inherently requires a hyper-obsessive, risk-tolerant, thing-oriented mindset that evolutionary biology has predominantly selected for in men.
Yes, that is exactly his claim.
Yeah.
He claims that the academic and corporate establishment, which he refers to throughout the text as the gynocracy,
The gynocracy, right.
he claims they're actively suppressing this biological reality. He argues they're doing this to enforce artificial diversity quotas, which forces incompatible neurological profiles into high-stakes engineering roles.
Ultimately degrading the foundational quality of the software we all rely on.
That's his conclusion, yes.
It is a heavy, highly controversial assertion that blends evolutionary psychology with computer science.
Very controversial.
But here is where the book takes a massive pivot, because the author doesn't stop at the digital world.
No, he takes it out into the real world.
He argues that this exact same dynamic, the addition of endless hidden rules, emotional dependencies, and compliance checks, has infected our interpersonal operating systems.
He takes this entire framework of software bloat and applies it directly to the analog world, specifically to modern relationships and marriage.
This is where the text heavily overlaps with the manosphere and men's rights activist philosophies.
Heavily.
Having established how men allegedly built the digital world through solitary, obsessive focus, the author pivots to argue that the legal and social systems of the analog world actively punish those exact same traits.
He draws a direct, literal parallel between software bloat and modern marriage.
And he starts with a historical phenomenon from the 1990s called the Windows 95 divorce. What is the story here?
So the author cites interviews with original Microsoft engineers who worked on the development of Windows 95.
The guys who built the OS.
Yeah. According to this data, a staggering 42% of the beta testers' wives left them during the intense, grueling final testing phase of the operating system.
42%. That is almost half.
It's a massive number. The author uses this historical data point to establish a baseline that female partners have historically been fundamentally at odds with the obsessive, world-excluding focus required for men to build world-changing technology.
Like, you can't have the technology and the happy marriage at the same time.
According to him, no. And he brings this dynamic right up to the present day in Silicon Valley, mapping out a geographic and cultural shift.
He talks about the MGTOW mile.
Yes.
For listeners who aren't familiar with the acronym, MGTOW stands for Men Going Their Own Way. It's a movement of men who actively choose to separate themselves from societal expectations of marriage and traditional relationships.
The text describes the MGTOW mile as a specific geographic area near the Googleplex in Mountain View.
Right in the heart of Silicon Valley.
Exactly. And in this area, highly paid tech workers are actively, deliberately choosing to live in high-tech, tiny homes.
The author calls them bachelor pods, right?
Bachelor pods, yes. And notes they start at around $89,000.
Wait, $89,000 for a tiny home?
Yeah, but these aren't rustic cabins. They come wired with gigabit fiber optics, Japanese bidets, solar arrays.
So they are highly optimized luxury living spaces, just small.
Right. But the core motivation for living in them is what the author focuses on. These men, many of whom make high six-figure salaries, are living in these pods specifically to avoid buying traditional McMansions, to avoid entangling their assets with a partner, and to absolutely eliminate the risk of paying alimony.
Financial self-preservation is central to this entire chapter.
It is the driving force.
Which leads directly to his breakdown of what he calls Prenup 2.0. Because apparently standard legal prenuptial agreements aren't enough for these engineers anymore.
No, because the author points out that traditional family courts have a history of throwing out standard prenups if a judge deems them unfair at the time of the divorce.
So the contract isn't rock solid?
Exactly. So these tech workers are using their engineering and systems design skills to structure their marriages the same way they would structure a corporate merger or a decentralized cryptographic trust.
The examples he gives here are just wild. There's the story of a senior engineer at Tesla.
Oh yeah, this one is fascinating. Yes, this engineer structured his marriage legally as a Wyoming LLC.
An LLC for a marriage.
Yeah, and the primary asset held by this LLC wasn't the house or a bank account. It was a cold storage wallet holding Dogecoin.
Dogecoin, a meme cryptocurrency.
Exactly. The text details how, when the marriage inevitably ended, the family court system was completely unequipped to dismantle the corporate structure.
Because it's not a normal asset.
Right. His ex-wife ended up receiving half of a shell company holding highly volatile meme cryptocurrency, completely insulating his actual tech equity.
That is some aggressive legal engineering. And then there is the CTO who implemented a literal technical barrier to entry for his engagement.
Yeah, he made his fiancée pass a rigorous Python programming fundamentals course before he would even let her sign the prenup.
He made her take a Python course.
He did. His logic, which is intensely cold, was that if she lacked the cognitive capacity to understand nested loops and basic conditional logic, she was fundamentally incapable of comprehending compound interest and the long-term legal implications of the contract she was signing.
Wow, it's a brutal, deeply transactional logic.
It really is. But the author uses these extreme examples to illustrate how these men have come to view modern relationships. He quotes a Stanford sociological study claiming that in 65% of divorces in the tech sector, the female partner cited the man's emotional labor deficits as a primary cause for the split.
Emotional labor deficits? How does the author deconstruct that specific phrase?
He attacks it aggressively. The author argues that emotional labor is a completely fabricated term, invented by gender studies departments specifically to pathologize the male brain.
Pathologize it, where?
Yeah, he argues that the ability to hyper-focus on a complex task to the exclusion of interpersonal harmony is the very trait that built the modern world. And now, society has labeled that exact trait a deficit.
He ties this all into a much broader cultural commentary, too. He brings in Jordan Peterson's famous analogy about lobster hierarchies and serotonin, and he discusses Canada's Bill C-16 regarding compelled speech and gender pronouns.
He's essentially arguing that society, through legal and social pressure, is demanding that men rewrite their biological operating system to accommodate the emotional comfort of others.
And because these men refuse to rewrite their OS, the author says they are adopting what he calls the red pill stack.
The red pill stack.
Yeah, this is a fascinating synthesis of modern technologies being utilized explicitly as a defense mechanism against societal capture.
That's a good tech survival kit.
Exactly. Break down this stack for us. What technologies are they using to defend themselves?
Well, the first layer of the stack is Bitcoin and decentralized cryptocurrency.
So getting off the standard grid.
Right. The purpose here is absolute financial sovereignty. If your wealth exists on a decentralized blockchain, the traditional family court system cannot easily track it, freeze it, or seize it.
Okay, that makes sense with the Tesla engineer story. What's the second layer?
The second layer is artificial intelligence. These men are using AI for labor leverage. Instead of hiring a diverse team of human employees, which brings HR compliance, interpersonal drama, and potential lawsuits, they automate the work through AI.
Keeping their operations incredibly lean and solitary.
Exactly. And the third layer is 3D printing and localized manufacturing, allowing them to build physical goods completely off the grid outside of traditional supply chains.
So if we look through the lens of this manifesto, the author describes modern relationships the exact same way he describes modern software, as bloatware full of hidden settings, complex dependencies, and emotional landmines.
That's his overarching metaphor.
So, based purely on the text, what is the end game here? Are these men simply retreating from society in defeat, or are they actively trying to architect a parallel, male-only civilization?
The author is adamant that it is the latter. He does not view this as a retreat. He views it as a strategic fork.
Borrowing that term from open source software again.
Exactly, where a project splits into a new, independent direction. He argues these men aren't hiding in tiny homes, they're optimizing their resources.
Optimizing.
Yeah, by aggressively removing the financial and emotional drain of what he calls the divorce industrial complex, they're freeing up massive amounts of capital and cognitive bandwidth.
And what are they doing with that bandwidth?
They're using that bandwidth to build parallel economies, decentralized networks, untraceable finance, automated labor pools that are entirely immune to social justice pressure, cancel culture, and family court jurisdiction.
Which brings us to the climax of the book, where the rejection of modern social structures connects directly with the literal physical rejection of modern hardware.
It's a fascinating conclusion.
The author pivots from the sociological to the intensely physical, describing a subculture that is retreating to the past to find a sanctuary.
This is perhaps the most visually striking and philosophically dense part of the author's argument. He details a rapidly booming subculture he calls the solder don't fold movement.
Solder don't fold.
Yeah, this is a massive $2.3 billion secondary market dedicated entirely to retro technology. And according to the author's market data, the consumer base for this movement is 87% male.
But to be clear, these aren't just guys buying old Super Nintendos to put on a shelf for nostalgia.
Not at all. These men are actively restoring and using 1990s hardware as their daily drivers.
Like using it for their everyday work.
Yes, they are writing code on them, managing servers on them. They are deliberately escaping the modern, hyper-connected, forced update environments of Apple and Microsoft.
Seeking out machines that are completely isolated and air-gapped from the modern internet.
Right. And the book shares some incredibly vivid stories from this subculture. One of the most famous is the legend of alimony.exe.
Oh, this story is crazy.
Yes, alimony.exe is the name given to a custom, heavily modified, water-cooled computer rig built specifically to run the 1999 video game Quake 3rd at maximum performance.
That's a beast of a machine for a 1999 game.
Exactly. According to the lore cited in the book, the builder's wife demanded he grow up, dismantle the rig, and sell the parts to pay for home renovations.
And his response?
He chose the computer over the marriage, he kept the rig, finalized the divorce, and named the machine alimony.exe as a badge of honor.
As a badge of honor.
Yeah, the author uses this story to illustrate the absolute uncompromising dedication to the machine over societal expectations.
But the author makes sure to point out this isn't just a movement of bitter older men reliving their glory days. He introduces Ethan, a Gen Z developer, to prove that this philosophy is crossing generational lines.
Ethan's story is highly pivotal for the book's thesis. Ethan is a 19-year-old coding prodigy. He was raised entirely on modern, sleek hardware.
So he has no nostalgia for the 90s.
None. But according to the text, Ethan completely abandoned his modern, top-of-the-line MacBook. He swapped it for a massive, beige, incredibly heavy Pentium desktop machine from the late 90s, equipped with a meager 96 megabytes of RAM.
A Pentium 2, and what did he do with it?
Working on that ancient machine, isolated from the modern web, Ethan built a fully functional, lightweight clone of the website Reddit in just 48 hours.
That is an insane technical achievement on that hardware.
It is. And Ethan's conclusion, which the author quotes extensively, was that coding on a machine with no Slack notifications, no Zoom calls, no forced diversity updates, and no internet distractions is like discovering a cheat code for the male brain.
A cheat code for the male brain. Wow, it's all about imposing raw, unfiltered constraints to force innovation.
Exactly, the constraints are the point.
The book talks about community events like the 233 Challenge. This is where developers compete to write a fully functioning graphical web browser from scratch, but they only have 233 hours to do it.
And the resulting software must be able to run smoothly on an archaic 233 megahertz processor.
It's extreme stress testing.
And speaking of stress testing, the author mentions these massive YouTube channels where guys are taking original Pentium chips and literally hitting them with blowtorches and flamethrowers just to see how much physical thermal abuse the silicon can survive before it finally snaps and fails.
It sounds chaotic. What is the point of all that?
Well, what the author is doing with all these examples is elevating a very specific piece of technology, the 1990s bioscreen, to the level of a philosophical ideal.
The bioscreen.
Yeah, for those who don't know, when you turn on an older computer, before Windows or any operating system loads, you see the BIOS. It stands for Basic Input-Output System.
Right, it's just stark white text on a pitch black screen.
Instantly flashing hardware diagnostics, memory checks, and voltage readings.
It is entirely devoid of design. It is just raw data.
Exactly. For the author, the BIOS represents the ultimate untainted truth. It relies entirely on pure, unforgiving binary logic.
It doesn't care how you feel.
It has zero capacity for emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
It doesn't care about your background. It forces pure accountability. Like if the memory is seated wrong, it halts.
Period.
As the author famously puts it in the final chapter, a Pentium chip will overheat. It will crash. It will literally catch fire and burn, but it won't gaslight you.
Okay, I have to stop here and challenge this logic because there is a massive, fascinating paradox at the heart of this book that I want your take on.
I know exactly what you're going to ask.
In the early chapters, the author aggressively champions these men as the ultimate pioneers. He compares them to empire builders, likening the raw engineering mindset to Elon Musk trying to colonize Mars and conquer the future.
Yes.
Yet, the undeniable heroes of his final chapters are guys actively hiding in their garages, obsessing over obsolete 30-year-old hardware, and playing Quake 3rd.
Right. It seems contradictory.
How on earth does the author reconcile this aggressive drive to conquer the future with this intense, almost monastic retreat into the nostalgia of the past?
It's a brilliant observation, and it is the exact tension that drives the conclusion of the book. The author reconciles this paradox by framing the garage not as a place to hide, but as a sanctuary of sovereignty.
A sanctuary of sovereignty.
In his view, the modern empire, the current tech industry, and corporate structure has been fully corrupted by the gynocracy.
So it's beyond saving.
Right. It is no longer a meritocracy that rewards raw performance. It is a compliance matrix that demands emotional submission.
So trying to build the future within that corrupted system is essentially a fool's errand.
Exactly. The men retreating to 1990s hardware are not, in the author's eyes, giving up. They are retreating to the last complex systems over which they have absolute, unquestionable root access.
Like monks preserving knowledge.
Yes. They're acting like monks, preserving knowledge during the Dark Ages. They are studying the ancient texts, mastering the raw fundamentals of binary logic, memory management, and bare metal programming.
So what's his ultimate conclusion then?
The author's ultimate thesis is that modern bloated systems will inevitably collapse under their own inefficient ideological weight. And when that collapse happens, these men in the garages will be the only ones left who actually know how to rebuild civilization from the bare metal up.
Wow. Okay, that is a staggeringly comprehensive, deeply intense, and obviously highly controversial worldview to digest.
That's a lot to take in.
It really is. It fundamentally challenges the narrative of progress in modern technology. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Conrad Reicher's Exploring the Pentium Era.
But to wrap up our analysis of this text, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Something for the listener to take away.
Yeah, something that builds directly on the author's thesis, but looks to the immediate, unavoidable future. If the author's premise holds true, if relentless, unempathetic optimization is exactly what built the early internet,
Right?
and if modern human developers are indeed abandoning that raw efficiency in favor of emotional consensus and DEI compliance, what happens when artificial intelligence fully takes over code generation?
Because AI doesn't have emotions.
Exactly. AI is, by its very architecture, a system literally trained to optimize at all costs,
Yeah.
completely devoid of biological empathy or social guilt.
It's pure logic.
So the provocative question this book leaves us with is this: will major tech corporations successfully program and constrain AI to become the ultimate rule-enforcing gynocratic HR tool, policing our language and code? Or, left to its own devices to optimize for pure performance, will AI evolve to become the ultimate ruthless Pentium-era coder that the author worships, rewriting the world infrastructure without a single care for human feelings?
That is a chilling and absolutely fascinating question to leave on. As the murky, emotionally complex waters of modern tech collide with the cold, binary logic of artificial intelligence, which side ultimately writes the future?
It's the ultimate test of his theory.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As a reminder, please like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these in-depth analyses.
We really appreciate it.
We highly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the ebook Exploring the Pentium Era, From Socket 4 to Web 2.0 by Conrad Reicher, if you want to read these controversial arguments in their original unvarnished form and judge them for yourself.
And don't forget to follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack.
Until next time, keep questioning the code you're running on.